You're listening to the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla. On today's episode of the AI Native Dev, joining me is Felipe Aguirre. Welcome, Felipe.
Thanks, Simon, for having me.
And today we're going to be really talking about how you can generate code using projects, using specs, using prompts.
Yeah,
And we're going to do it in a very developer-focused way.
exactly.
We're going to talk about it in this episode in a very developer-focused way to show how you can actually build through discussion, through a chat API, and really show what, in this case, Claude, which is what we're going to be using to generate that, can do. We're going to split this up into 2 episodes again. In this episode, we're just going to really talk about some of your experiences, what you built using Claude. And then in the next episode, which will be released shortly after this one on YouTube only, we're going to jump into screen share, and we're actually going to try and build a front end to a database access. Let me introduce you, Felipe. So Felipe is a senior data scientist. You have a PhD in computer science, 15 years of experience in education, research, also startups and government. Also the organizer of AI Tinkerers, which is actually a worldwide organization. They have chapters effectively in various places. And whereabouts is your chapter?
In Medellin, in Colombia.
Medellin,
I'm
Colombia.
originally from Colombia. Yeah.
Amazing. And so tell us a little bit about what the AI Tinkerers does, what it is as a community.
Sure. Yeah. So AI Thinkers is a global community, and the idea is we always say that luck is a mixture between preparation and opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say that AI Thinkers is the venue where we make these opportunities happen.
Oh, nice.
You know, so when we prepare people together so that the opportunities can happen.
Yeah.
So we gather once a month for tinkering, discussing what we're doing. We have a very relaxed format of presentation. We don't like long format presentation with slides. We just want to see your code running, even if it's messy. It doesn't matter. It's as if you were bragging what you've done to your best friend, you know.
Sharing.
And that really creates a nice atmosphere.
So do check that out and see if there's
there's chapters all over the world.
Yeah, you mentioned one in London, so I'm going to definitely check that out.
I was
as well.
in Paris last week for the inauguration.
Yeah. Cool. And you're also recently co-founded a company. You're a founder as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I ran a company for 2 years. We were 3 co-founders in the fashion industry.
Uh-huh.
It was a blast. It was a great experience, a great learning experience for me. And I really got the taste of entrepreneurship, grinding and working hard and trying to make things happen. But sadly, the market is quite hard at the moment, as you can imagine. Like we all know that it's quite hard to raise money at the moment.
Yeah.
And we did build a product that, even though adds a lot of value, is a really high cost of acquisition per customer. So finally we didn't make it, and we decided to make the right choice, which is shutting down the company.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. But as part of that, you actually did some building using Claude Projects and building applications and front ends with AI. So it's not a core part of the business, but you were using it effectively as a developer, right?
I think that the way we built our company was the right way to do it 2 years ago. But what I've learned with all of the experiments that I've done so far is that actually it's much easier nowadays to build MVPs. I don't know about production-ready products. I think I will still rely on professional developers to make sure that a front end is really working. I'm not a front-end developer. But when I compare the time it took us to build the first prototype, the first MVP, to show to our clients to see if they're actually willing to pay and willing to buy this product versus what I can do today, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I see that this is really going to shape the industry in serious ways.
Yeah. So let's talk about your journey, as it were, through using various different types of AI. In terms of using an AI assistant in an IDE, doing one line at a time, I guess Copilot is most familiar to people for that type of AI coding assistant. How much have you used that? How did you find it?
Like I do remember I was part of a private beta of GitHub Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long time ago. I don't remember.
It feels
3-4 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I remember talking to my colleagues back in the day. I was at a different company. People were a bit hesitant. I saw it and I said, this is actually not that bad. It really managed to, you started the function, you did doc strings and like a comment, and boom, it built a function. And it actually worked pretty well. And it got me really excited. But I never thought that we will get to the point we are today. And afterwards, ChatGPT came out, and then the rest is history. I started using it for So I'm a data scientist. I have very few experience with front end, but I've always tried to build front ends for internal apps. Like, it's always nice to have internal apps to look at whatever is happening with your business. But always it was static HTMLs, you know.
Mm. Well, this is interesting, really, because if you're using something like Copilot, let's say you're someone who doesn't know anything about front ends. When you're using something like Copilot, you have to be a little bit more surgical in terms of when you declare what you want.
Sure.
You say it in comment by comment, say, look, I want this. And sometimes, you could say, give me a method that does this. But that's even if you don't know really what you're doing around front end. And I'm a back end developer by trade, so front ends, similar kind of aversion to front end, let's say. So if I was to go down to that level, I don't know what I would ask for in Copilot or comments. But then when you take it up to a ChatGPT, or we can talk a little bit about Claude, you ask for bigger things.
Yeah, right? That's where I was going, actually. Like, with the front end, I didn't use Copilot for the front end. Precisely for what you were saying. Like, you're not going to build a full web app with just Copilot, you know. If you do know front end, of course, but if you don't know much about it, you really need the full thing done. So that's where I started using ChatGPT, and it was not that bad, actually. It was quite good, but there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of Googling around because things didn't work. So we just Google around the errors. And I also used it a lot for building the whole data infrastructure of Predictia, my previous company. I didn't know much about infrastructure as code. Actually, ChatGPT was really good at building AWS SAM scripts for step functions, Lambda functions, and API gateways and stuff like that. I really felt powerful. It was really nice to do that with ChatGPT, and that was amazing. I remember that's when I did that, we started paying right away GitHub ChatGPT Plus to all of our employees. Oh my God, this is a huge productivity boost. But it was not yet at the point that Claude brought us, which is I can actually trust this to do a full-fledged front end, and it will work.
So let's talk about that then, because you did a couple of projects, right? You did the one project which was a product colors catalog, and then a second product which was a product match explorer. Now, both of these you use Claude. What was it that drove you to Claude? Was it the model itself providing a better level of code return that you were expecting? Was it the project's functionality? Was it the AI engineer? What was the drive?
I would say I don't know, like Twitter, let's say.
Twitter.
Like, just
social pressure.
No, not even pressure. Everybody's talking about it. But basically, to make the story short, I gave a talk at AI Thinkers Medellin because I really felt that some people in the community were not using LLMs from the API. Everybody's using ChatGPT, but not everybody's using the API to actually build products. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a quick demo so that people know how to call the API and try to motivate people to do that. And that was a huge surprise for me because I said, okay, let's do this very quick demo of how to extract colors from shoes. And I was happily surprised that in one morning I managed to replace a model that took us 3 or 4 months to do with traditional machine learning. I did it with OpenAI in one morning, and it's way better. So that really opened my eyes, and I realized, like, oh, I think I'm underutilizing ChatGPT. I was using it, but maybe not as much as I should. So that started our journey. Okay, what else can I do? And I had been seeing people around talking about coding with differently, not with Copilot, of course, but like full-fledged apps built entirely from LLMs. And I bumped into Claude Engineer, which I think is a great tool. That was my first approach to it, which is this agent. It's built by this Italian guy, Pietro, I think it's called. He partnered up with Anthropic now to work on that. And it was quite cool. The thing is that I felt that it was really powerful, but I don't know, as a scientist myself, I think I wanted to touch the equivalent of bare metal in this case, which is no, I want to go directly to the LLM and me being the one who tests everything. I wanted to test the raw power of Claude. So that's what led me to different experiments where I said, okay, I'm going to force myself to use the web UI. I'm not going to use any extension in VS Code that calls Claude. And I'm going to document everything.
And it has advantages and disadvantages. When we think about the advantages, you can get directly to Claude and you can craft your prompts as you wish. Those are the prompts that are going to Claude. However, you're not necessarily seeing it in an IDE, right? You're still seeing it in a web UI. So the experience afterwards, after Claude has created a number of files which it stores in its projects and things like that, it's something that you can't necessarily then play with in an IDE.
Yeah. I think it was a painful experience, let's say.
Yeah.
But again, like I really took it as an exercise, as a test. I don't think that's the right way of doing software nowadays. Like moving forward, I will use Cursor or VS Code. We continue that dev, something like that. But it was really important for me to take everything from the middle. Like I want to go straight to the experience, and also backed by Claude projects and artifacts. I think it was a good setup to actually build my mindset, develop my own workflow.
Yeah.
That was important for me. And also, that's why I'm saying I took the scientist out of my heart and said, okay, let's do some statistics over this. So I used Git to document everything, and in each commit I documented how many prompts I used, how many of those prompts were corrections over mistakes that the LLM did. And also I took note of this commit is working on the back end, on the front end, the data model, scaffolding the project. So I did a full documentation of these that I will put on GitHub so that people can take a look at it.
Yes, let's describe that. Let's describe what you were faced with in terms of the screen that you had for people who aren't familiar. So you obviously had a space to prompt. You had and projects allow for a number of files to be created and stored for you. You can use those various files as context, and you can actually refer to them, right? To say, I want you to do X, taking Y and Z into account, where Y and Z are two files maybe in the project. Yeah, in terms of that flow, what were your requests? Talk us through the kind of requests that you would make to Claude, what you would have as context stored, and then what you would do with the output.
Yeah. So let's go back a bit on actually why we're here talking, you and me. So when I started doing these experiments that you described, like right after I finished my second one or something like that, I saw your first podcast. And it really struck me. Wow, they really put in words what I've been feeling, and mostly around we're going from a code centric to a product spec centric software development process. So and that's important to notice. Like the product spec centric aspect of it is quite important in the experiment I was doing, and I really felt that the future of software developers is going to be increasingly become product owners and architects. So I tried in these control experiments, and actually it's also worth saying that the experiment that I did was something outside of Predictia, my company, because I felt it was important to start something from scratch. How is Claude going to be helpful for me if I start something from scratch, something that I don't have any prior knowledge? So I did a web-based version of Cards Against Humanity that I called Cards Against AI. But at the end, that's just details. But to get into the details of your question, so basically, the Claude interface has what we call projects, which is very simple. It's a very simple interface, but extremely powerful. It's just like an isolated environment where you have like common chats that they all belong to the same environment. You have a pseudo system prompt. This is the prompt, the instructions for everything that goes into these chats. And then let's say like a folder where you can just upload different files. And what's important there is that, again, coming back to the fact that we become product owners and architects. So the instructions is like my mindset as a product owner architect of how I envision the whole product. And the files that you put into it is not the code itself, but product specifications, natural language product specifications, and also technical specifications like, I don't know, like SQL DDL script to build a database, which is code also, but technical code that can serve as technical specification, the open API schema definition, and things like that. So that is the setup, like an environment that understands that you're trying to build Cards Against Humanity. You describe the tech stack that you want to use, the style of interactions you want to have.
And that's interesting, the style of interaction, because this you're referring to the roles, I presume, for this.
Among other things, like roles, but also like the main instructions. For example, something I really like is to say, provide mermaid diagrams when relevant.
I see, okay.
Because it's actually quite good at coming up with abstractions of what it's telling you, putting them into mermaid diagrams. And with the artifacts interface, which is basically inside a chat, when Claude recognizes that it actually has something that can be shown in a different document, we have a right pane that previews the document. So if it's a mermaid diagram, you can see the code of the mermaid diagram, but also you can see the diagram.
Right.
If it's React code, you can see the code, but you can also see a rendering of the React visual.
And that's interesting, actually, that rendering.
Yeah,
it's effectively a REPL in the Claude
exactly.
project, right? So it's not just code that is being generated, it's
Yes.
actually running that in a local
Yeah.
sandbox.
It's a bit tricky because in reality, sometimes like you create a React visual that tries to import components from other files. So if it
Right.
creates 3 different files, and there's like an app that calls component from other files, but it doesn't render. So you have to cheat a bit and force it to put all the components in the same
Yeah.
file. So it's not as powerful as Replit, but I think you saw recently. I haven't tried it, but Replit they actually released an LLM based agent. I have to give it a try, but I've been on holidays for the past month, so it's just crazy. You stop for 1 month and you're outdated immediately.
You've got about a year to catch up for it. Yeah.
But anyway, that's my next thing to test. Yeah.
So the conversations that you have, they're effectively, you have it against various roles. You might have it against start a conversation with a front end specialist or a back end specialist or a data specialist and so forth. There's also, because I've seen obviously the video that you presented where you actually go through a lot of this. You talk a little bit about firing roles essentially.
Yes.
So this is when a conversation, this is where you effectively get to a dead end with a conversation and you need to start again essentially. Tell us why you get to that dead end and what the value of that. I think you mentioned handovers, what the value of a handover is going from one to the other.
So before going into that, maybe let's talk about roles first, because I think I skipped that part of the question, and I think it's important, and that leads to the dead end afterwards. So I really felt that what I was doing, it felt like each different chat is as if I were talking to a different software developer. So when I was, and I think we all agree, up until this point, we all agree that you have to keep things tidy and one conversation, one subject. You cannot just open up a chat and build the whole app in one chat. And projects provide you with the environment, you can have different conversations. So it's important to keep separate conversations for separate subjects. And even when you're talking about backend, you can have several conversations about backends and several conversations about data models. And that's where I think that the role of the software developer is still relevant, because we know those abstraction layers and we know what goes with what, and we know the glue points between the different roles. But basically the roles that I had, like the obvious ones, which is backend developer, software developer, and data engineer. The CTO was the meta prompt, let's say. The data engineer was actually quite good. And I also had some separate roles that served as auditors. They cannot interact in between chats, but if I have one chat where I'm writing front-end specifications, because the whole project is not for writing the code, I use it also to write the specifications of the project. So I thought it was important that, because as we said at the beginning, product specifications is the future. So if that's the future, Claude should help me write the product specifications, and that makes part of the source code.
So you have prompts which are short term, which allow Claude to create these longer term specs that then it is able to then create the code from, with all of that information and context in that.
That's what I was trying to achieve. That's what I achieved. And those specifications, I also added them to the repository. They're in Git. They're committed to Git, and they make part of the statistics. And just to remind you, 39% of the prompts that I used were dedicated to product specifications
to create the spec that the code's from.
So at the end, for example, I have a front-end developer helping me write the specification of the front end, then another one helping me, a back-end developer helping me back-end specifications. And then I had a full stack developer where I said, please read front-end specifications, back-end specifications, and let me know if there's something wrong, if there's consistency, what you should change. I was quite impressed with what it said. Like, it said, listen, you forgot this data model that will be used in this part of the front end for doing this and that. And that was actually quite powerful. Like, before actually implementing, I used a lot of critiques between the different specifications to actually get to that.
Did the developers get very flustered with their feedback, and they started speaking very defensively towards
you?
Is it that real life?
But it's funny, the way I described this auditor, I actually described it as a colleague that nobody likes, but it's quite useful. We all know what we're talking about.
Actually gives really good feedback.
We don't like you, but thank you. So that's the description I gave to that role. And going back to your question about firing up these roles, so let's talk about the error rate. I think it's important. Let's develop about the error rate, because I actually didn't fire him. I fired myself. You have to be honest on that.
Okay.
Of course, I'm the one who made the mistakes.
Yeah.
So I did 169 prompts with an error rate of 28%. We can develop further that.
And an error is describe an error.
I put a prompt.
Yeah.
I say, please make a red button,
Mm-hmm.
a square red button,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes, I don't know, like a diamond blue button. That's an error. So I know, please. I said square.
You'd need to fire that one straight. That one straight.
No, I mean, yeah, for sure. So that's an error. Like I asked for something, and it does something that is not in accordance to what I asked. And another error is implement the front end, and then I run it, and I bump into an error. It doesn't run.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to, I got this error, it didn't run. So that's an error. But what I realized is that most of those errors were due to lack of clarity. And we're circling back to what we were saying, like product specifications are key. Clear product specifications are key. And sadly, I didn't take note of how many of those corrections were due to my lack of specificity. But I do have this subjective feeling that most of them was the case. Because, and again, the reason I did Cards Against Humanity instead of an app for Predictia is because I wanted to bump into these cases.
Yeah.
I wanted to bump into the case where specifications are not clear for me and assume that's the new source code. And there you have the proof. Like most of the errors, I do have the feeling that I was not specific enough.
I was going to say, what would you do next time then to remove those errors? Is it
be better?
There's a really good quote actually. Guypo had a session with Des Trainer of Intercom, and Des said something. I'm going to ruin this quote now, but Des said something along the lines of like willingness or a wanting, a need for short prompting. So to write short prompts is robbing us of the ability to add specificity into our requests. So effectively, we can short prompts and get something back from an LLM quite easily. But it's actually the devil's in the detail, as it were. A lot of the important information that we want to get across to the LLM, we tend not to sometimes, just because a short prompt will do. Is that kind of how you felt you were interacting with Claude a little bit, giving not enough information for the depth it needed to actually create you something it wanted? Still stuff too much in your mind and not enough on the prompt for it.
So here's the thing. I completely agree with that. But I have a bulletproof solution for that, which is in my instructions, I say always ask for clarifying questions. So I can be lazy because I'm lazy, and then Claude realizes I'm being lazy and asks a lot of clarifying questions.
That's almost where you want a role of almost like we talk about junior developers a lot in the podcast and with AI, but almost a role where there's a developer or someone who's constantly asking clarification questions or depth questions. Like, okay, I see what you're asking for here, but how? Or maybe there's clarification on, do you mean this or do you mean that? And just add that level of detail. So that's a really nice interaction where the LLM's prompting you, effectively asking you to add more detail.
It solves the blank page problem. It's hard. Like thinking is hard. And sometimes you ask a friend to be your sounding board, and it actually helps. But in that case, my sounding board is Claude, and it just ask me as many questions as you can.
And one thing, we're going to ask a little bit about takeaways and things like that, but one thing sounds relevant to add it here is you mentioned as a good takeaway, you do less writing now in terms of obviously code for sure, but possibly less in just keyboard taps anyway. Less writing, but more thinking. And that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about that in terms of what were the things if you were just to start writing code from scratch, what would be the things that you wouldn't think about up front, which an LLM is actually forcing you or making you think about earlier?
So let's put numbers on that. AI wrote 87% of the lines. So that's a lot. I only wrote 13
of code or everything. So specification, code, data models, development.
So much less writing. But the way I see it is, I don't know, let's assume that you can put an IQ requirement to every software development task. And let's assume that 80-90% of software development out there is, you don't have to be very clever to achieve that. Maybe it will require between 80 IQ, an IQ of 80 and 110, 120. I don't know how much that is. Let's just assume that, whatever, just for the purpose of illustration. I feel that with Claude, everything that requires a lower IQ is immediately automatized. It's as simple as that. Like the easy things, that the things that are easy for you, that is just mechanic, automatic, like you're typing and you're not thinking, all of that is automatized.
The dull jobs that developers
Yeah.
tend not to want to do anyway. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
That many developers after 10, 20 years, they get bored and they don't want to code anymore because of that, because all of the same thing. So all of those things, like, they go away quite quickly. And you're left with these high IQ requirement tasks that you have to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the experiment really made me realize that was tough.
Yeah.
It was a tough exercise. It was really tough to be thorough in your description. Or another way of saying it is, my mind is a closed loop. Like, my messiness, all of my messiness inside, they speak to each other. And they know how to speak to each other.
Yeah.
So if it's only me who is coding, I can let the messiness be and things will happen. The code will be written. But when you have a second brain, which is the LLM, you cannot speak with messiness. You have to put your order on your head to make it clear so that the instructions are clear enough for that thing to handle their own messiness and write what you want to write.
It's like teaching someone else or education. It's like when you realize, it's funny when you think you know a topic and then you realize you have to go and present at a conference about this topic and you realize, oh crap, I only know about 10% of this. And then you think about all the edge cases, and you need it's breadth and depth in terms of what, the extra you need in order to actually be able to describe that to someone else so that they can actually get that good understanding. And it's interesting to know where those gaps would be if you was to not do that. What were some of the biggest surprises then that you had while doing this? Was there some around that lack of explicit context that you were adding in the prompts and conversations? Were there other surprises as you were going?
For me, the surprise is, that I love software development, but I was not trained as a software developer. I was trained. I'm actually a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
Then I did my PhD in computer science, but that doesn't make you a computer scientist. That just makes you a PhD, let's say. And all of my life, I wanted to become a software developer. And I think I became one. As a data scientist, you have to do some software development. I actually became good at not being the typical data scientist that just do Jupyter notebooks. I do some backend. I put things in production. It's okay. But I always felt like I cannot build a product, a full product. I don't have the capacity to build a full product. So what surprised me the most is that actually with these, now I can. And that these models are powerful enough to help me do a POC. And even an MVP, a viral product that people can pay for. And for me, that was quite surprising. And the fact that it was clever enough to understand my instructions. It was clever enough to compare front-end and back-end specifications and come up with ideas.
And what was it, do you think? Because if you was to go to ChatGPT, plenty of people will say, this isn't good enough to provide me with exactly what I need to go to a market with or something like that. Do you feel the structure of the Claude Projects environment helped as well?
Yeah. I was going to that too. There's Claude as a model that is more powerful, I would say. But there's also projects and artifacts that, it also provides with, for example, for myself, where I don't know about front end. So I had the ability to iterate some visuals in React with the artifacts before even thinking about going to the terminal and doing npm run dev or whatever. I didn't know how to run a Node.js project at the beginning. But it doesn't matter. With the artifact, I can see the visual. And then I said, okay, I like that. Now help me implement everything and tell me how to run this thing because I don't know. So yeah, I think, and I do think that projects and artifacts are equally important as a good LLM.
Yes. Yeah.
In my case.
And when we talk about artifacts and the stages that you have to go through, how does that differ to normal software development in terms of, you talked about project specifications, we talked a little bit about the architecture design and things like that, maybe some technical specifications. Or I guess when you sat down to do it, first of all, how did you approach it and how would you do it today differently?
Yeah, the way I approached it again was I wanted to force myself to only write prompts and only on the web UI. I wanted to be as close to the LLM as possible and avoid any other interactions. So that's how I did it. How I would do it for the next project is I will still use the Claude Web UI for specifications because I think it's quite comfortable. Why use something else? Like, it's really comfortable with the artifacts. You can see a markdown document that is being written and modified. So that's comfortable enough. For the mockups, it's also very good. So maybe that's what I would use. Although I also see that Versal did a version of VC something to build mockups. Maybe I will give it a try to that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to code and implementing the code itself, 1 month ago I was saying that I was going to try Claude Engineer, but then I took a look into Cursor that they released recently the composer mode that I can actually do a comparable thing to what I did in the web UI, which is you give an instruction and it gives you several files and it actually modifies several files or creates several files. I'm really curious to see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like it's going to change the way workflows can work. What advice would you give to a developer today wanting to implement this type of new workflow?
I would say, first of all, is a change of mindset. Like, I do think that, as I said, like all the simple tasks are going to be automated. So we're going to remain with the difficult tasks. And those difficult tasks, they require a different mindset. Like, you have to think as a product developer and not as a software developer. I think that will be the best advice I could give. So now to develop further on what I mean by that is that now implementation, the code is just the implementation and it starts becoming less relevant. I've been a hardcore Pythonist for my whole life. Now I'm considering maybe I will do Node.js. I don't care.
Yeah.
This will be written.
Yeah,
it's just an implementation. Even the Cards Against Humanity, I did the backend in Python. And I was thinking, it doesn't make sense. If the front end is in Node.js, I should just do the backend in the same service. So things like that. Switch your mind from code matters, but not as much as before. Proper code does matter. And you have to be the auditor of the process so that code is actually good. Yeah. Don't trust blindly. I don't think we're ready to trust LLMs blindly at the moment, but it becomes just an implementation detail. So really focus your mind as a product developer, care about why you're doing what you're doing, who is going to use this, who is going to be the end user, care about the user experience, the UI, and broaden your spectrum. I think that I do have a feeling that I don't know if it will still make sense to be a back-end developer, front-end developer. I think we will have a broader base of knowledge in all disciplines of software development, and maybe we will still have specialties. Maybe we'll still have back-end developers and front-end developers, but you cannot just be that.
Yeah,
I think
that's interesting. Developers will effectively be more holistic.
Yeah,
and I guess that lends itself to the architecture style of thinking of the application as a whole, and recognizing more holistically flows that go all the way through from a user to a back end or something.
Now, I have to give some nuance to my advice because I think it's important. I'm talking as a recent entrepreneur. I had my startup. I'm thinking about somebody that wants to build products and early stage startups. I don't know if enterprise software developers should follow my advice. Maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess it's different if you're building something from scratch.
Yeah.
Claude doesn't have to look and already know about a huge existing system, which would be a lot of context, and I think that's definitely a trickier.
But if we're talking about startup concepts, I think that's the one. Like, become architects, become product owners. I'm really worried about it. I think that us that were raised in this era where we actually had to write code. We are lucky enough to go through that because we will be able to audit the code. But what about the newer generations? I'm really worried about that.
It's going to be an interesting transition as well, because you mentioned, I think it was 87% of
87%, yeah.
87% of anything generated was generated by an LLM. So apart from your prompts, 87% generated by the LLM, the rest was added by you, whether it's specifications or code, etc. And you did do a little bit of coding. How do you see that balance between human coding, the need for humans to write code, and the need for humans to effectively drive an LLM to write code or write some implementation? How do you see that balance changing over a year or two, 5 years, 10 years?
So
the killer question of asking a 10-year out question about what the future is going to be with AI. I apologize for that.
Don't worry. It's funny because I feel that I think we can all agree on that the future became a really weird concept.
Yeah.
The future can be tomorrow.
Yeah. 2 weeks out.
2 months. And also when you talk with some people, you feel that they are living in the past.
Yeah.
Like I have this feeling when I speak to software developers that they are not using ChatGPT or code assistants. Are you living in the past? What is happening? So it's like weird because at the moment, people are living in the past, in the present, and have the future right here in your nose. Yeah. So what is that future? For me, that future immediately is, I think for as long as my mind works, I want to continue building products.
Yeah.
like maybe not coding, but building products. But right away, immediately, I don't think LLMs are good enough to the point that we don't need to code anymore. I think we still need to code. I do dream of a world where, even though I love coding, I think it would be beautiful if we can just build products out of product specifications, not prompts. I don't like the word prompts. I like it, but it's too generic. It's like saying English is too generic. What do you mean? Is it an essay? Is it an email? Is it music? So I would say product specification, not prompts,
but potentially using prompts to maybe generate those specifications or help, which is what you did with Claude.
But at the end, the product specification is what will matter. I think that's the case. Natural language product specifications that you can use an LLM to help you write them, like the page problem, like ask me questions about this idea that I have. And at the end, you will get to it. It's okay. But natural language specifications, but also technical specifications like API, open API schemas and stuff like that, tests. And the advantage that we have is that code is verifiable.
Yeah.
So if we have good specification and good tests, I think we can get to that point.
Yeah. Awesome.
I don't know when, but I hope
we'll see. It won't be long.
Let's see.
Amazing. Felipe, thank you very much. And appreciate you coming to London in person. It's been great chatting actually in the office for the last couple of days, and great to be able to do this podcast in person.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. And right after this on YouTube, we're going to hands-on. We're going to show Claude 3.5 with your project setup, show the Git flows, the ability to create specification, to generate code using the methodologies and the workflows that we just talked about. So do look out for that. And thank you for the listeners for tuning in, and hope you tune in again soon.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.